The overwhelming majority of people who have survived a near-death experience describe visiting a land of peace and love, a place they call heaven. But other survivors are convinced they literally traveled to hell and back, and the journey has turned their lives inside out. Here's our story. Hell, a concept as old as religion, but hell may be more than an abstract concept.
And they start scratching and biting me, and it really, really hurts, just like the real world. It's very painful, and I'm screaming and yelling, and they take a lot of pleasure out of my pain, and they're all laughing, and there's this tremendous cacophony of noise all around me.
13 million people in this country have died and lived to tell about it. Most describe visiting a world of light and warmth, but others tell a very different tale. Russian scientist and psychiatrist George Rodanaya took a journey that, while incredible, is not unusual.
I was waiting for a cab, and I was ready to depart to United States to work for Yale University.
Friday, September 25th, 1976. A dissident scientist, Dr. Rodanaya, had been trying to get out of the Soviet Union. Finally, he was given permission, or so he thought. The KGB had a different idea.
I know that the first hit came to my legs, and he came so strong that I flew up on the car, but instead of falling down, I flew several meters forward, and then this car moved toward me and ran over me.
Dr. Rodanaya was dying of massive internal injuries, but as technicians tried to coax life back into his mangled body, he was beyond pain, beyond consciousness.
I'm in total black, horrible darkness. You cannot write, you cannot paint, you cannot imagine such a darkness.
Then Dr. Rodanaya began the journey, so often reported, the journey beyond life.
Such an incredible crystal white. Everything around is in white. Everything is bright. And the horizon is white. Everything is bright. And it's as a flash of camera.
At this point, Dr. Rodanaya found himself floating above himself in what is known as an out-of-body experience.
I watched how they operated on my body. I watched how they declared dead. I watched how my wife cried. I watched how they put me in morgue, how they closed the door.
As an autopsy could not be performed until the following Monday, Dr. Rodanaya's body was left in the morgue. But as the nightmare continued, Dr. Rodanaya believes he roamed the world telepathically.
If anybody had any thought that what's happened with George, poor George, I was there. For example, I could see what my wife was thinking, my friends were thinking, and that was the incredible experience.
Dr. Rodanaya claims he watched from above when physicians began the autopsy. Finally, one of them noticed his eyes were open and closed them. They opened again. The physician closed them a second time.
He became curious, and he closed it and waited, and he took hand up, and he saw that, the pupils are convulsing, becoming smaller and smaller. And he said, whoa, that's life.
Amazingly, 1/3 of all patients brought back from death report a similar journey. Dr. Bruce Greyson has been studying these near-death experiences for the past 20 years.
Some people who do have this out-of-body experience interpret it as the soul or the spirit leaving the body. Others just say, I left my body. We have nothing in Western science or Western medicine to explain this.
These near-death experiences have been reported for thousands of years.
As far back as we have records from American Indian cultures, they're in the Bible, they're in the Egyptian and Tibetan Book of the Dead, from ancient Chinese writings. All these cultures have left records of near-death experiences, similar to those we hear now.
Some researchers believe the experience is the final function of a failing brain, and that the images are nothing more than hallucinations.
During the
time between the stoppage of the heart and lungs and the ultimate death of all the cells of the brain, that brain is shutting down in a variety of ways, but it's still capable of producing experiences.
They also point out that these experiences may not be unique to people who are dying.
Almost all of the kinds of things that we hear people describe in so-called near-death experiences are experienced from time to time by people having ordinary dreams at night as well.
But near-death survivors say their experiences seem much more real than dreams.
People don't transform their lives on the basis of a dream or a hallucination or a drug-induced state, in fact. Whereas following a very brief near-death experience, people drastically change their attitudes, beliefs, lifestyles.
Research on the subject is hampered by the fact that most near-death survivors don't like to talk about it.
They're afraid, rightfully so, that they will be thought crazy or ridiculed or rejected for doing so.
Other people have an even more compelling reason for silence, for they are convinced that they went to hell.
These people in the darkness, I believe, were just people whose lives were full of contempt and hurt and hate. They were interested in playing with me, trying to elicit as much terror from me as they could.
Before his experience, Howard Storm was a university art professor and successful artist. Howard's life took a dramatic turn in June of 1985. On a trip to Paris, France, he suffered a ruptured duodenum and was rushed to an infirmary. But there was no surgeon on hand. Howard was given 5 hours to live.
So I said goodbye to my wife. She said goodbye to me. She got up, she hugged me and kissed me, and she cried and I cried, and then eventually she sat back down, and I decided to let it go, let it happen. And I went unconscious.
The next thing he knew, he was out of his body.
I was absolutely convinced that I was alive and real, except there was this corpse in the bed that looked like me, but it couldn't be me because I was standing there yelling and screaming and trying to talk to my wife and my roommate. And I thought they were just playing games with me.
And then he heard voices encouraging him to follow them out of the room and down the hall.
I got to the point where I said, I don't want to go with you any further. And with that, they started to pull and push at me to keep me going with them. And I started to fight back.
Howard soon found himself at the center of a nightmare.
It was an orgy. And I was the centerpiece of the orgy, and it was an orgy of cruelty and pain, my pain, which gave them a certain amount of delight and pleasure.
Ultimately, he asked for help.
And with that, a person of light, a beautiful, radiant being, came there and reached down and picked me up, and as I was being picked up, I saw myself for the first time, and I looked like roadkill. I was covered with gore, and I was all torn up. And as I was being picked up, all of that disappeared.
His experience ended when a nurse walked in and he regained consciousness.
It was now 9:30 at night, and she said, a doctor has arrived at the hospital and he's going to do the surgery on you immediately. And he did.
Howard Storm still paints, but he left his position at the university to become a minister. Before his brush with death, he worked with nudes. Now his works are filled with images of darkness and light. His case is not unusual. No matter what the explanation or where the ultimate destination, nearly all near-death survivors find the experience changes them for the better.
My brain began to work absolutely differently. I could grasp anything. I was working. It was very, very easy to learn, to work, to study, to be alive.
We find that once people are no longer afraid of dying, they're not afraid of living either. They're more willing to take risks, to enjoy life to the fullest, because they're not afraid of losing it.
Many skeptical scientists believe that near-death experiences are nothing more than hallucinations. One thing is for certain. In many cases, these visions have profoundly changed their lives for the better, and nothing could be more real than that. Encounters will be back in a moment.
When we return,
saw orange rings of light underneath.
our search for extraterrestrial life continues.
There is a phenomenon here.
When our cameras follow a team of UFO investigators next.